Well, without this, not only would it be really dark, but we'd be dead. Let's talk about light. What's up, fellow plant enthusiasts? My name is Dylan Bain, and this is Bain's Botanicals. Today, we're going to be talking about light. Light is fundamental to almost all of life on Earth, and it's definitely important for the plant kingdom. Plants use light to make food in a process called photosynthesis, and most people have a general idea of what photosynthesis is. You could definitely get more technical with it if you wanted to, but I'm going to keep it really simple today. Inside of a plant cell, there are these organelles called chloroplasts, and it's in here that photosynthesis takes place. Chloroplasts create the substance chlorophyll, which is what makes plants green. But it's not just light that plants use to make food. It's also the water they absorb. It's also the macronutrients like potassium and phosphorus and nitrogen. It's all this really complicated process called photosynthesis. So that's kind of the long and short of it, I guess. I could probably do a whole video on photosynthesis, to be honest. Maybe I will. But how does this translate to houseplants? Well, I mean, since we're keeping plants inside of our houses, we have to kind of factor in that they still need light, even though they're not going to get the same type of light that they would get outside. Now, again, you could get really complicated with this. We could start talking about foot candles and lumens and the measurement of light and everything, but we're not going to do that because it's a little too technical. And honestly, even I don't know all of the specifications of it, so basically, you just need to kind of take into account what plant you have and then kind of experiment with where it does best. So I've got a few plants here. I'm going to give you some examples. Here we have, well, no. So plants that are darker green tend to have more chlorophyll, so they don't need as much light. So think about something like a spathiphyllum, a peace lily. The leaves on those are usually really dark, and as most people know, spathiphyllum is a low light plant. You can kind of keep it in an office, you can keep it where there is some light. I mean, you can't have no light, but they'll be fine because they just don't need a lot of light. The more variegation a leaf has, or the lighter color it is, it's going to need more light. So here's an example of a Syngonium. Syngonium generally aren't bright light plants necessarily, but when they're variegated like this, they do better when they do have a little bit brighter light. This is a tricolor, and the leaves on it are just gorgeous. I mean, not only do you have that light variegation, I'm touching the wrong leaf, there we go. Not only do you have that lighter variegation right there, you have that pink in there, and it's just amazing. I mean, what a gorgeous plant. Something like this will keep that beauty in brighter light. Not direct sun, don't do that because then it'll die because it'll get scorched. But yeah, then you have to take into consideration too, a lot of plants have big flat leaves. I mean, that's so that they can absorb as much light as possible. That gives them more real estate. Something like a palm, this is a Chamaeodora, which is just a parlor palm. Think about the fact that these leaves, or I guess you could call them fronds, but I think it's still technically leaf, they don't have a lot of real estate. So they kind of need more light, if only because of that. I mean, they need more light anyway because they're obviously from the tropics, but yeah, since there's not as much real estate, they're not going to get as much light, so they just need more of it. Then we have plants that don't have green in them. So I've got this irisine here, which is a beautiful kind of bright red, and then you've got kind of that dark maroon in there, or burgundy, wine, whatever you want to call it. Just a really pretty plant. I don't know a ton about this. I've kept it alive for a while, but so far it's doing pretty well, other than a couple of dead leaves in there. But generally speaking, the more exotic the color, just like variegation, the more exotic the color, the more light it's going to need to be successful. Perfect example of this is Aglaonema, the Chinese evergreens. The green variations of these, like the green I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. I can't think of the names. But the green leafed ones, they tend to do better than the ones that are like pink and red that kind of have those more exotic colors in them, because again, the more exotic the color, the less chlorophyll there is, and plants need chlorophyll. The more chlorophyll they have, the more food they can create for themselves and the more successful they can be. So something like this, like I said, is going to be a little trickier, but it's got a lot of new growth on it. I mean, just because it doesn't have as much chlorophyll doesn't mean it can't be successful. So that being said, what am I forgetting? Yeah, variegated plants, some variegated plants tend to revert to their solid green forms if you don't give them plenty of light. So just kind of keep that in mind. Some plants like, I've got, you can't see it, but I've got a Milky Way aspidistra in the corner. You can kind of see one of the leaves a little bit, but it has the speckles, like the speckled variegation, if you want to call it that. That's not going to tend to revert, but something like this, that has this more exotic, you know, these big bright colors, it really needs light so that it doesn't revert. So just kind of keep that in mind. So how do we measure light? I feel like I'm saying so a lot. It's okay. How do we measure light if we're not using like the little meter or foot candles and all of that? You just kind of have to look and experiment. I have grow lights. Grow lights are an excellent thing. Sometimes they can be a little expensive. The ones that I'm using are actually from Lowe's, and they're only about $20 a piece, but I mean, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, I've got 6 that I know of, so that right there is what, 120 bucks? So I mean, they can get expensive if you're not careful. But they do help supplement light, especially in my house, because this is the only viable window I have. It is south facing, which is the best light. Ooh, which reminds me, we got to talk about that. But still, it's just it's not enough for me to feel comfortable, so I got grow lights. With grow lights, certain plants you don't want to put too close to the grow light, not necessarily because of the heat, because most grow lights are LED now, which means light emitting diode. LEDs don't really put off heat like the old school fluorescent lights do. So you don't have to worry about that. But the problem is certain plants, when they get too much light, they scorch. As a general rule, I usually try to keep my plants about 6 to 12 inches, depending on the size and the plant, 6 to 12 inches from the grow light, which I'm looking back at the top here. There is an Aglaonema, which is basically touching the grow light, and it's doing fine. I probably need to move it, but it's just sucking up all that light and loving it. But I did have a white knight philodendron that, as the new leaf came out, because when a new leaf comes out, it's more fragile, it's more susceptible to pests, it's more susceptible to scorching. This new leaf on this white knight philodendron scorched under a grow light because I just had it a little too close. I probably only had it 2 or 3 inches away. So there's definitely some experimenting you have to do yourself. There's not necessarily a one tried and true way, you know, because think about grow lights. They all put out different amounts of light, and you just kind of have to play with it. Just kind of like watering. You have to kind of play with what your plant likes and how it responds, and it's just kind of a process, which when you have a bunch of plants like I do, it can be kind of a trial and error. Anyway, but yes, in your windows, it's nice if you have big windowsills. Plants like Aeschynanthus, the lipstick plant, or ficus. Most ficus tend to like a lot of light. Philodendron, they can be kind of low light, but they tend to like light more. You can put them in windowsills and next to windows and things, then they'll be just fine. Because even when light comes through the window, it's still diluted by the glass, by potentially curtains, blinds, whatever you have. It's just not going to be the same intensity as if you stuck the plant outside in the direct sun. If you walk outside, think about it. Think about looking at light through a window versus actually walking outside when it's at the brightest point of the day. You're like, oh my God, why is it so bright? I need sunglasses. It's because our windows filter some of that light naturally just through the glass. That being said, just kind of experiment. Don't put plants too far away from the window. I mean, depending on the plant, I wish I could show you my room. Maybe I'll do some B-roll, maybe. I've got a plant sitting on a table kind of across from me, and there's no window near it, but I think there's enough ambient light coming in the room that it does just fine. We talked about grow lights, we talked about that. Windows. So a lot of people may already know this, but a south-facing window, because we're in the northern hemisphere, is going to provide you with the most intense light. The sun, because the earth is tilted, I swear I'm trying not to get complicated. Because the earth is tilted the way it is, the sun never reaches directly overhead where we are, so it's always kind of pointing at an angle, and because of that, that angle is going to be more direct when it's a south-facing window. I swear I'm trying to keep it simple. If we were in the southern hemisphere, a northern-facing window would be better because the sun would be facing the other way. That being said, eastern and western-facing windows work as well, but north-facing windows you generally don't have plants in front of unless they're low light, because especially in the wintertime, you're not going to get enough light to sustain light-loving plants like palms and other plants that need a lot of light. I'm looking, Strelitzia, like bird of paradise, those need a lot of light too. Okay, hopefully that made sense. I swear I could have made it more complicated. I think that might be about it about light. Just my best advice is err on the side of not enough light if you're experimenting, because you don't want to scorch your plants. If you think, well, I've got this plant and maybe it's a low light plant, don't stick it like right next to the window or out in the direct sun, because it'll probably scorch. And that's a lot harder to recover from than if a plant's not getting enough light. The way you can tell if a plant's not getting enough light, it's going to start to look kind of pale and kind of sickly looking. And if it's a vining plant, you might notice that the growth gets really leggy. For example, like a philodendron or a pothos. Where is... it's right there. My heartleaf philodendron. During the wintertime, I noticed that it gets a little bit leggy even with grow lights, because there's just not as much light in the wintertime because the earth is facing away from the sun. Hence why it gets cold and nasty and all the leaves fall off of everything. But yeah, I really think I got everything. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. If you guys have any questions, just let me know in the comments. I've been loving interacting with you guys, and I try to respond to every comment I get. Maybe someday I'll have a bajillion followers and I won't be able to do that, but for now I'm trying to take care of you guys. And yes, thank you for your support. Thank you for following and liking the videos and everything. And I'm going to get some more videos out to you guys real soon. The next big video like this we're going to do will be about water, and I'll probably have some plant care videos in between that. So yes, until I talk to you guys again, thank you.